Liam was a man fashioned from iron, grease, and the unwavering laws of thermodynamics. To the outside world, he was a retired industrial engineer with a face that seemed permanently etched in a scowl of concentration. He belonged to a generation that viewed vulnerability as a structural flaw and verbal affection as an unnecessary redundancy. In Liam's world, love wasn't a poem or a bouquet of roses. It was a reinforced concrete foundation, invisible but indispensable. He didn't tell his only daughter, Chloe, that he adored her. Instead, he expressed his devotion by meticulously checking the tire pressure on her car every Sunday morning, ensuring the tread was deep enough to weather any storm. He showed his care by obsessively researching the safest car seats when she was an infant and, later, by grueling over her university applications to ensure her future was as stable as the machines he once designed. Chloe grew up in the shadow of this quiet, stoic mountain. To a young girl craving the warmth of "I love you" and the comfort of shared secrets, Liam appeared not as a protector, but as a cold, distant authority figure. His conversations were brief, functional, and devoid of the flowery nonsense he so detested. When she reached milestones, graduating at the top of her class or landing her first major job, Liam would simply nod once, a sharp, decisive gesture that meant the task had been completed to specification. He thought he was teaching her resilience. She thought she was failing to earn his heart. The rift between them solidified into a permanent geographical feature the year Chloe met Henry. Henry was everything Liam was not: charismatic, silver-tongued, and radiating an easy, polished warmth. He spoke in the superlatives that Chloe had spent 25 years starving for. When Henry asked for Chloe's hand in marriage, Liam sat across from him in his dimly lit study, eyes narrowed behind thick spectacles. He didn't see a charming suitor. He saw a man whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes, a man who moved with the practiced ease of a predatory cat. Liam's blessing was a series of grim warnings. He spent the wedding rehearsal lecturing Chloe on the importance of maintaining a separate emergency fund and gave her a heavy-duty toolkit as a wedding gift. "Marriage is like a boiler, Chloe," he had said, his voice raspy and devoid of sentiment. "If you don't keep an eye on the pressure valves, it'll blow up in your face. Don't call me when it leaks. Fix it yourself." Chloe had walked away from him that day, her eyes stinging with tears of frustration. To her, this was his final act of rejection, a refusal to celebrate her joy, a cynical prophecy of her failure. She moved into Henry's sprawling suburban estate, leaving behind the house that smelled of sawdust and old motor oil. As the months passed, the silence between father and daughter grew into a vast, echoing canyon. The 5-minute phone calls they shared were mere formalities, exercises in civil distance. Chloe began to view her father as a relic of a primitive past, a man too stubborn to change and too old to understand the language of modern love. She didn't realize that while she was looking for the sun, her father was busy building the shelter she didn't yet know she would desperately need. The rhythm of their estrangement was as predictable as the ticking of the antique regulator clock in Liam's hallway. Once a month, at precisely 7 p.m. on a Sunday, the telephone would bridge the 600-mile gap between Liam's solitary workshop and Chloe's high-ceilinged life. These conversations were masterpieces of brevity. Liam would ask about the structural integrity of her house or the performance of her car's engine, and Chloe would respond with polite, one-word reassurances. To Chloe, these calls were a chore, a lingering tether to a man who refused to acknowledge her happiness. To Liam, they were a diagnostic check, a way to listen for the subtle hum of a life running smoothly. However, the hum began to change. Over the course of 3 months, Liam's finely tuned ears detected a shift in the frequency of Chloe's voice. The confident, independent woman who had walked away from him was being replaced by someone who sounded increasingly hollow. The pauses between her sentences grew longer, heavy with unspoken thoughts. When he asked about the boiler of her marriage, her answers were scripted, almost rehearsed. She stopped talking about her career and began focusing entirely on Henry's needs, Henry's schedule, and Henry's preferences. The red flags were microscopic, but to an engineer who spent decades identifying hairline fractures and steel beams, they were glaring. The breaking point arrived on an unremarkable Tuesday. Liam, driven by a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest, broke the monthly routine and dialed her number. The phone rang 4 times. Unusual, as Chloe usually answered on the second. When the line finally clicked open, there was no sound of the television or the clinking of dinner plates. There was only a heavy, sterile silence. "Chloe," Liam asked, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Checking the oil. You hit the 5,000-mile mark yet?" Normally, Chloe would sigh, offer a sharp retort about his obsession with maintenance, and give him a brief update. But this time, the response was a jagged departure from reality. Her voice came through the receiver unervingly bright, vibrating with a manic, high-pitched energy that made the hair on Liam's arms stand up. "Oh, Dad, I'm doing wonderful. Simply marvelous," she chirped, the words tumbling out too fast, like a machine with a broken governor. "Everything here is perfect, really. Henry is such a saint. You should really focus on your own health now, Dad. Don't worry about us at all. Please, just stay at home and get some rest. I love you so much." The line went dead before Liam could utter another syllable. He stood in his kitchen, the receiver still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. His heart hammered against his ribs with a rhythmic thud of alarm. In 25 years, Chloe had never told him she loved him over the phone. She had never suggested he rest. Most importantly, she had never sounded that terrified while claiming to be happy. To Liam, that "I love you" wasn't an affection. It was a desperate SOS signal broadcast over a jammed frequency. It was the sound of a system under terminal stress, a structure screaming just before a collapse. He didn't see a daughter expressing love. He saw a prisoner reading a script with a gun to her head. The stoic engineer didn't hesitate. He walked to his workshop, bypassed his usual projects, and pulled out a heavy, locked Pelican case from under a workbench, the specialized tools he had kept from his years in industrial counterintelligence. The distance between them was no longer a canyon. It was a target. He had ignored the flowery words his whole life, but he would not ignore the lie hidden within them. Liam grabbed his keys, the scowl on his face deepening into a mask of cold, calculated fury. The rescue mission had begun. The drive from Liam's industrial town to the affluent suburb of Oak Ridge was a 6-hour descent into a different world. Liam's old Ford F-150, a beast of rusted iron and reliable mechanics, groaned as it ate up the asphalt of the interstate. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't drink coffee to stay awake. He survived on the adrenaline of a man who had finally found a problem he couldn't fix with a standard schematic. In his mind, Chloe's high-pitched "I love you" played on a loop, each repetition sounding more like a shattering pane of glass. He arrived at 3:15 a.m. The neighborhood was a sanctuary of manicured lawns and silent, darkened mansions. Liam bypassed the main entrance to Chloe's estate, opting instead to park his truck behind a cluster of overgrown pines on a public access road that skirted the rear of the property. He moved with a grace that belied his 65 years, a muscle memory from his years managing security protocols for high-stakes chemical plants. He didn't head for the front door. He headed for the perimeter. Opening the Pelican case in the bed of his truck, Liam pulled out a specialized thermal imaging monocular and a high-gain parabolic microphone, tools of a trade Chloe thought he had long forgotten. He sat in the darkness of his cab, the greenish hue of the thermal screen reflecting in his glasses. The house was a fortress of luxury, but to Liam, it was a biological organism under observation. He watched the heat signatures. Most of the house was cool, the HVAC system running at a steady, efficient clip. But there was a persistent warmth in the master suite, and, strangely, a jagged flicker of heat in the small laundry room at the back of the house. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, Liam saw the first human movement. Henry's charcoal gray Mercedes slid out of the garage at exactly 7 a.m. Liam watched through binoculars. Henry looked impeccable, not a hair out of place, his jawline sharp, radiating the confidence of a man who owned the world. But he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat sat a woman Liam recognized from a company newsletter, Henry's executive assistant, Sarah. They weren't just carpooling. Henry leaned over and kissed her, a long, proprietary gesture that sent a surge of cold fury through Liam's veins. As soon as the car cleared the driveway, Liam focused his microphone on the house. For 3 hours, there was nothing but the hum of the wind. Then, the back door creaked open. Chloe stepped out to take the trash to the bins. Liam froze, his breath hitching. Even from a distance, The change was catastrophic. The vibrant, fiery woman who had once stood up to him was gone. She moved with a strange, hesitant shuffle, as if she were walking on eggshells even when no one was around. She wore an oversized hoodie despite the morning humidity, the sleeves pulled down past her knuckles. He zoomed in with the thermal lens. The heat signature on her wrists was uneven. Inflammation. Bruising. Liam felt a primal roar echoing in his chest, but he suppressed it. He was an engineer. Emotion was for the aftermath. The current phase required data. He watched her for 40 minutes. She didn't leave the porch. She stood there, staring at the driveway, her posture slumped in a way that suggested a total collapse of spirit. She looked at her phone twice, her fingers hovering over the screen, but she never made a call. She was waiting for a leash to tug. Liam realized then that the bright voice from the Tuesday call wasn't just a lie. It was a performance dictated by a director standing just out of frame. At 11:30 a.m., Henry's car returned. This was unusual. Henry should have been at the office. Liam watched as Henry and Sarah entered the house together, laughing. Chloe met them at the door. Through the parabolic mic, the audio was jagged but intelligible. "Is lunch ready?" Henry's voice was stripped of its public charm. It was flat, demanding, and laced with an undercurrent of threat. I didn't think you'd be back until 6, Henry." Chloe's voice was a whisper, a stark contrast to the manic cheerfulness of her phone call. "I asked a question, Chloe," Henry replied. There was a sickening thud, the sound of a hand hitting a doorframe, or perhaps something softer. "Sarah is hungry. Don't make me ask a third time." Liam heard a sob, quickly stifled. Then Sarah's voice, sharp and mocking. "Honestly, Henry, if she can't even manage a sandwich, what good is she? Maybe she needs another reminder of her place." "Go to the kitchen, Chloe," Henry commanded, "and leave your phone on the counter. I saw you looking at it earlier. One more suspicious move, and I'll call your father and tell him you've had a mental breakdown. He'll believe me. He already thinks you're unstable." The door slammed shut, cutting off the audio. Liam sat in the silence of his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the old leather groaned. The betrayal was absolute. Henry hadn't just stolen Chloe's joy. He was using Liam's own reputation for coldness as a weapon against her. He was gaslighting her into believing her father, her only lifeline, was her enemy. Liam stared at the house. He could go in now. He could take his tire iron and break Henry into pieces. But he knew the law. He knew the Henrys of the world. They were protected by layers of polished lies and expensive lawyers. If he attacked now, Henry would play the victim. Chloe would be too terrified to testify, and Liam would end up behind bars, leaving his daughter truly alone. No, he needed more than a tire iron. He needed a blueprint of Henry's crimes. Liam reached into the Pelican case and pulled out a series of small, innocuous objects. To a casual observer, they looked like standard hardware: a modified smoke detector, a set of high-end door hinges, and 3 digital clocks with heavy mahogany frames. Inside each was a state-of-the-art surveillance suite. Miniature cameras with infrared night vision and microphones capable of picking up a heartbeat through a wall. He checked his watch. Henry usually took Sarah out for client dinners on Wednesday nights. He had 6 hours to prepare. Liam didn't see himself as a grandfather or a retired engineer anymore. He was a system restorer. He was going to infiltrate the structure Henry had built, find every rotten beam, every hidden crack, and every structural failure. Then, he was going to bring the whole house down on Henry's head. He began to map the house's layout based on the window placements and the movement of the heat signatures he had tracked. He identified the dead zones in Henry's own security system, the gaps in the expensive cameras Henry had installed to watch his prisoner, not to protect her. "You told her I wouldn't care, Henry," Liam whispered to the empty truck, his eyes burning with a cold, predatory light. "You told her I was too old to notice. That was your first mistake. I don't need flowery words to see a rat in the rafters." Liam adjusted his glasses and began to prep the first device. The silence of the truck was no longer heavy. It was the quiet of a hunter waiting for the wind to shift. The strategy was simple: precision over power. Liam knew that to dismantle a predator like Henry, he couldn't act like a soldier. He had to act like a nuisance. He needed to enter the house legally, linger long enough to compromise the structure, and leave without leaving a single footprint on Henry's radar. At 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, as predicted, Henry's Mercedes swept out of the driveway. Liam watched through his binoculars as the car turned toward the city's upscale dining district. Chloe remained inside, a silhouette of profound isolation against the living room light. Liam didn't wait. He drove his truck to the front gate and rang the intercom. When Chloe answered, her voice was a trembling wire of anxiety. "Henry, did you forget something?" "It's your father, Chloe," Liam said, his voice deliberately shaky, affecting a frailty he didn't feel. "I was driving through to see an old colleague in the city. My truck started making a sound, a rhythmic knocking in the transmission. I thought I'd stop by and leave those antique clocks I promised you. My back is acting up, and I can't keep them in the cab anymore." There was a long, suffocating pause. Liam could almost hear her mental gears grinding, the fear of Henry's rules clashing with the ingrained habit of obeying her father. Eventually, the gate buzzed open. Chloe met him at the front door. Up close, the damage Liam had glimpsed through the thermal lens was heartbreakingly clear. Her skin was sallow, and there was a frantic, darting quality to her eyes, like a bird trapped in a glass box. She kept her hood up, but as she reached out to help him with the first box, the sleeve of her hoodie slipped. The dark, mottled purple of a thumbprint on her forearm sat there like a brand. Liam's jaw tightened until it ached, but he kept his meddling old man mask firmly in place. "Careful with that, Chloe," he grumbled, gesturing to the box. "These are delicate mechanisms, not like the junk they make today." As they moved into the foyer, Liam began his silent infiltration. He moved with a calculated clumsiness, bumping into a side table and accidentally knocking over a vase of lilies. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Dad," Chloe gasped, rushing to get a towel. The moment her back was turned, Liam reached into his pocket. With the speed of a man who had spent 40 years working with microtolerances, he swapped the standard smoke detector on the foyer ceiling with a pre-configured unit from his Pelican case. It took 6 seconds. The foyer was now live, audio and video streaming to an encrypted server in his truck. "I'm sorry, I'm just tired, Chloe," Liam sighed, leaning heavily against the wall. "The pressure valves in my own head are acting up. Do you have some tea? And maybe a wrench? I noticed your kitchen sink has a rhythmic drip from the driveway. It's driving me mad." Chloe hesitated, glancing at the clock. "Henry will be back in 2 hours, Dad. He likes the house a certain way." "It'll take 10 minutes, Liam insisted, walking toward the kitchen with the box of clocks. "I can't sit in a house that's literally leaking money into the drain." In the kitchen, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. Chloe moved with a robotic efficiency, her eyes constantly monitoring the back door. Liam went to work under the sink. He didn't just fix a leak. He created a secondary maintenance requirement. He loosened the primary nut on the garbage disposal just enough so that it would vibrate violently when turned on, requiring a return visit if necessary. While he was under the cabinet, he placed the second transmitter, a magnetic acoustic sensor, behind the baseboard. "There," he grunted, pulling himself up. "Drip is gone, but you've got a structural vibration in the disposal. Tell Henry he needs a professional or the whole pipe assembly will crack." Chloe handed him a cup of tea, her hands shaking so much the porcelain clattered against the saucer. Liam took the tea and sat at the island, placing the 3 mahogany-framed digital clocks on the counter. "These go in the living room, the master bedroom, and Henry's office," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its feigned shakiness. He looked her directly in the eyes for the first time. "They sync with the atomic clock in Colorado. They never lose a second. Reliability is the only thing that matters in a home, Chloe. Remember that." Chloe looked at the clocks, then at Liam. For a fleeting second, the fog in her eyes cleared. She saw the intensity in his gaze, the same look he had when he was checking the blueprints for a high-pressure gas line. She realized he wasn't just talking about clocks. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't be here. Henry, he isn't who you think he is." Liam reached out and placed his rough, calloused hand over hers. He didn't offer a flowery comfort. He didn't tell her it would be okay. Instead, he gave her the only thing an engineer could offer, a promise of structural integrity. "I know exactly who he is, Chloe," Liam said, his voice as steady as an iron pillar. "And I know who you are. You're my daughter. You were built to withstand a lot of pressure, but even the best steel has a fatigue limit. I've checked the foundations of this house tonight. They're rotten. A tear escaped Chloe's eye and fell into her tea. He says no one will believe me. He says you think I'm weak. He says he has everyone in his pocket. Henry is an amateur, Liam said coldly. He thinks perception is reality. But in my world, reality is what's recorded in the logs. I'm going to leave now, Chloe. Put the clocks where I told you. Don't touch the smoke detector in the hall. And when the phone rings tomorrow at 7 p.m., answer it. Speak normally. The walls are going to start talking, and Henry isn't going to like what they have to say. Liam stood up, grabbed his empty box, and walked toward the door. He didn't hug her. He didn't say, I love you. He just paused at the threshold and looked back at the sprawling, expensive prison. Check the tire pressure on your car tomorrow morning, Chloe, he said. I left a gauge in the toolkit I gave you for the wedding. Make sure it's at 32 psi. You'll need the grip for the road ahead. He walked out into the cool night air, leaving Chloe standing in the foyer of a house that was no longer a secret. As he climbed into his truck, he flipped open his laptop. 6 screens flickered to life. He saw Chloe standing in the foyer, looking up at the smoke detector with a mixture of terror and budding hope. He saw the mistress's perfume bottle on the side table. He saw the master bedroom, where the heat signatures had lied to him. Liam put the truck in gear. The Trojan guest had successfully planted the seeds of a digital revolution. Henry thought he had silenced his wife by isolating her, but he didn't realize that Liam had just turned his own sanctuary into a witness stand. The stoic father had finally spoken, not with words, but with a network of ironclad evidence. The countdown to the collapse had begun. The motel room was a makeshift tactical operations center. Liam sat bathed in the cold, blue light of 3 monitors, his eyes tracking every movement within Henry's house, like a veteran radar operator watching for a missile strike. On the primary screen, high-definition night vision revealed the living room where Henry paced, drink in hand, radiating a restless, predatory energy. On the secondary screen, the audio waveforms spiked and dipped, the rhythmic sounds of a house that was finally surrendering its secrets. Liam had spent 40 years ensuring that structures held together under pressure. Tonight, he was going to ensure that one specific structure, the elaborate lie that was Henry's life, shattered into 1,000 unrecoverable pieces. The clock struck 7 p.m. on Thursday. Liam reached for the burner phone. He dialed Chloe's number. Through the hidden camera in the smoke detector, he watched Henry stiffen as the landline rang. He saw Henry signal Chloe with a sharp, cutting motion across his throat, a silent command to stay in character. Chloe answered. Her voice was steady, anchored by the knowledge that her father was watching. Hello, Chloe, Liam said, his voice the very definition of professional indifference. It's Liam. I'm checking the logs on the clocks I left. Are they holding the signal? Henry moved close to Chloe, leaning his head in to eavesdrop. On Liam's screen, the audio from the hidden transmitter caught Henry's whispered snarl. Tell the old fool they're fine and get him off the line. Chloe didn't flinch. They're working perfectly, Dad. The synchronization is absolute. Good, Liam replied. I'm looking at the data now. There's a massive surge in the office sector. Henry, you there? You should hear this. The friction in your accounts is reaching critical mass. Henry grabbed the phone from Chloe's hand, his face a mask of patronizing amusement. Liam, honestly, you and your machines. Chloe needs to rest. Why don't you go back to your workshop and leave the business to men who actually understand how money moves? Liam leaned back in his motel chair, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was the smile of a man who had already pulled the pin on a grenade. I understand exactly how money moves, Henry. For example, I've been watching the $4.2 million you moved from the Henderson account into an offshore shell in the Cayman Islands last Tuesday at 2:14 p.m. I've also been watching you explain it to your mistress, Sarah, while my daughter was locked in the laundry room. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the silence of a man who had just realized the floor beneath him had ceased to exist. What are you talking about? Henry stammered, his voice losing its polished veneer. I'm talking about the blueprints of your downfall, Liam said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, tectonic power. Every word spoken in that house for the last 24 hours has been recorded. Every bruise on Chloe's wrists has been logged in 4K resolution. Every fraudulent transfer you initiated from your home office has been mirrored to a server at the district attorney's office. I didn't come to fix your sink, Henry. I came to perform a controlled demolition. On the monitor, Liam watched Henry's face turn a sickly shade of gray. Henry spun around, looking frantically at the smoke detector, the clocks, the walls. He looked like a trapped animal in a gilded cage. You can't do this. Henry screamed into the phone. This is illegal surveillance. I'll have you ruined. Illegal? Liam grunted. I'm a co-owner of the property, Henry. Chloe signed the deed over to a family trust years ago for tax purposes, a trust one manage. I'm just conducting a routine safety inspection, and the safety of my daughter is the only metric that matters. At that moment, the primary screen showed the front gates of the estate being rammed open by two black SUVs. The flashing lights of the Special Victims Unit and the Financial Crimes Division illuminated the driveway. Liam watched as the front door was breached with a battering ram. Henry dropped the phone. He tried to run toward the back exit, but he was intercepted in the kitchen by 4 officers with drawn weapons. Liam watched in silence as the man who had thought himself a god was forced onto the tile floor he had complained was dirty. He watched as the mistress, Sarah, was let out in handcuffs from the guest suite, her face a mask of shock. Liam didn't cheer. He didn't feel a sense of triumph. He only felt the heavy, satisfying click of a job finished to specification. He closed his laptop, walked out of the motel room, and drove back to the estate. The scene was chaotic. Officers carrying out boxes of evidence, forensic photographers documenting the house. Liam walked through the foyer, past the shattered door, and headed straight for the living room. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a gray police blanket. A female officer was talking to her gently, but when Chloe saw Liam, she stood up. The bird-like terror in her eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, staggering realization. Liam stopped 3 feet away from her. The stoic engineer, the man of iron and grease, looked at his daughter and saw the structural damage he had allowed to happen through years of silence. "Dad," she whispered. Liam didn't speak. He reached out, and, for the first time in a decade, he didn't check a tire or a valve. He pulled her into a clumsy, powerful embrace. He smelled the fear leaving her and the strength returning. "The structural integrity of this family is being restored, Chloe," he murmured into her hair. "I spent too long building walls when I should have been building bridges. I was wrong. The toolkit I gave you, it wasn't just for the house. It was a reminder that you have the power to fix anything. But you don't have to fix it alone." Chloe sobbed against his chest, her hands gripping his old work jacket. "I thought you didn't care. I thought you hated me for marrying him." "I was quiet because I was watching," Liam said, pulling back to look at her. "But silence isn't the same as absence. I was always in the foundation, Chloe. Always." As they walked out of the house together, Liam looked back at the mahogany clocks he had left behind. They were still ticking in perfect unison, marking the beginning of a new timeline. Henry was gone. The mistress was gone. The lies were recorded and filed away in the archives of justice. Liam helped Chloe into the cab of his truck. He checked the rearview mirror, saw the police lights fading in the distance, and felt the heavy weight of the last few months finally lift. He reached into the glove box, pulled out the tire pressure gauge, and handed it to her. "We're stopping at the gas station on the way out," he said, his voice returning to its familiar, raspy growl. "Your front left is low. 32 psi, remember? We have a long drive home, and I want the grip to be perfect." Chloe laughed through her tears, clutching the small metal tool like it was a holy relic. She finally understood. Her father didn't speak the language of "I love you," but he spoke the language of "you are safe, you are valued, and I will never let you fall." And in a world of shifting sands and broken promises, that was the only language that mattered. The truck roared to life, a steady hum of reliable machinery, and the engineer and his daughter drove away from the wreckage, heading toward a home that was finally, truly, structurally sound.